We can edit later. There.
Great.
Okay. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this, Fritz. Should I call you doctor or?
My students always, they ask me, but I tell them that Fritz is really fine. They often kind of they want to call me Dr. Fritz or Professor Fritz or something like that.
Yeah.
No, I just go by Fritz. That's the easiest thing. That's my last
good.
name. I mean, no. Fritz is just fine.
Yep, that's good. I go by Danielle too. Well, or Mom.
yeah. I go.
Yeah.
No, I don't go by Mom, but I go by Papa. Actually, the German way of saying it.
Oh yeah. Okay. Good. Well, I just have to say, your book. Wow, it floored me. Okay, so for our listeners, this is I take notes. The Dark Sides of Empathy.
It's very colorful, actually, the dark sides.
Oh yeah, the many days and the many post-it pads I've gone through.
It's also funny in the sense of dark sides. No, it's the colorful sides of the empathy. It's not the dark sides anymore.
Yes, exactly. Riveting book, and not at all what I was expecting. I read an article on NPR based on this book, and that's what enthralled me. I was like, I have to read this book. I'm really interested in understanding empathy as well. And once I started digging in and seeing where this was taking me, which was not what I expected, I felt a bit of dissonance inside, because I was like, this is not what empathy is. And are you familiar with Bren Brown?
Bren Brown, a little bit, but not as much as you maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm a fan of hers too. But and
okay,
so
good. Then yes.
Yeah, and she points to the positivity of empathy and how it's necessary in eradicating shame. And you led me to believe, but empathy could be a catalyst for shame. And so even just that alone was a lot for me to grapple with. But by the end of the book, I felt like I had such a greater understanding of empathy, and I never realized the other side of it. So what really struck me was, what was it in particular that inspired you to write this book? Like, was there a specific event that had happened that made you feel convicted to go this angle? Because the angle you went, including some of the more recent current events and talking points, made me feel like it could have been a bottling up, but was there something specific?
I think I started the book for two reasons. The first one was simply that when I started to think about something like empathy, I noticed suddenly, it's always self-observation, I noticed that some things turn me on for empathy and others don't. And so I was trying to just understand myself better. Where do I jump in? Where do I suddenly feel involved? Where do I have full empathy? And where is it not happening? So the first thing was simply this understanding, well, yeah, I have empathy, but I don't always use it in an equal way. And so I just wanted to understand that. So it was partly an intellectual kind of thing in the beginning to see, well, what's really going on here? Where are things happening? Where do they take me to the right thing? Then I also, of course, noticed that some other people, I would kind of be completely on the floor when something is happening or in tears, and others around me would be kind of cynical or would be completely put off. And vice versa. I've noticed that people have different ways of reacting to things. So those were certainly things that I observed. And then, of course, I also observed what I start this book out with, this idea of having too much empathy, this idea of self-loss here. And that was something that I became especially interested in, that to notice, yes, empathy, of course, is usually a good thing. And I agree to that, even though, of course, I write about the dark sides of empathy. I still believe that empathy has a big role to play. But it has so many weird aspects where things go wrong with it, including the one that I noticed that some people actually are better off not to empathize in some cases. And that made me wonder, because until then I had thought, the people who don't empathize, they're cold-hearted. And then I realized, no, in some situations it's better not to use empathy. What are these situations, and how is that happening? So that's kind of how it started me. It wasn't like the recent political events or so directly. But then, of course, that interested me greatly too.
And that was great anecdotal example to demonstrate the 5 specific dark sides. I really appreciated that. You start off with Nietzsche, a philosopher I am still learning about. I've been trying to understand him for a couple of years, but he's. However, what you had revealed regarding the loss of the self, I kind of veer towards understanding how the ego can override us, and from a Christian perspective, Christ is the representation of how we control that ego, and working towards a kenotic or a kenotic relationship, this idea of kenosis, self-emptying. And so I couldn't help but wonder if, well, I was curious about your religious background and your belief, mainly because most of our listeners are of the Christian persuasion, being that it's about continuing the canon where we find further inspired works in other writers. And did you see any kind of parallel, or maybe even just the shimmer of a reflection from the idea of the self-loss geared towards this idea of self-emptying? And is that maybe an area where the tension balance could be more directly applied, especially for those of the Christian background?
Okay, two sides here. So my own Christian background is that I was raised in Germany as a Protestant, and my family background is now within the Protestant movement in one extreme corner of the Pietists. The Pietists were kind of a radical Dutch-German branch of Lutheranism in the 17th century that were kind of questioning things more radically than others. So, for example, I mean, one of the things of Luther is always that, I mean, for the key concept of Lutheranism is that you cannot forgive yourself. That's basically, that's for him the ultimate sin. So when you forgive yourself, then basically shoulder clapping is basically what he doesn't allow. And that's why he didn't like the Catholic practice at that point of forgiving sins and buying yourself out of that. Now, the Pietists took this one step further. They took that so far to say, well, you never know. I mean, you can't forgive yourself, but you also will never really know what you're doing yourself that is good or not. Because even when you do something good, you may just be copying other people who did good for your role models, or you may just do this in order to get praised. You've learned that you should not do certain things, so you're doing it because of that. So again, that does not count. It does not establish that you're truly good. So my heritage, which is also happens to be the German philosophical heritage of most German philosophers, including Nietzsche, but the people before, was radical self-doubt. That you never are sure who you are, what you are really doing yourself, but you should not give up you should not stop trying to figure that out. So that's my kind of my cultural heritage in that respect here. So in this Nietzsche reading that I do there, and it's really, I'm not really trying to do justice to Nietzsche in all respects here. I'm using that more to kind of trying to understand a certain consolation. Now, where for me the interesting thing is that Nietzsche is also very skeptical whether there can even be such a thing as a self, something truly self. He thinks that's an illusion. And he says, well, basically, it's a dangerous illusion. And that's his point, that we projected that others have that. But then, of course, what is interesting is he connects that with empathy or pity, in the sense that we observe others and make them bigger than they really are. And that resonates with me, with my kind of background on the one side, but it's also for me first of all, it's an interesting dilemma, the dilemma to say, well, that you basically end up with only negative notions. Nietzsche doesn't give us any kind of positive way out. His state of selflessness is not a positive one. It's not one of the one that you just described here for something to relax in a way, but he says, no, it's a state of resentment and jealousy. You're jealous of the self of others. And so that was a dilemma that I thought was very interesting, that there's not this positive, easy state of things.
Yeah.
I could go on, but maybe leave it at this. this
and you did such a great job
professor.
in the book doing so. But going on and I understand Nietzsche just a little bit more now, and so now I'm more interested in understanding him deeper as well. But so you lay out the 5 dark sides of empathy, and I'm wondering if you could just walk us through those 5 sides, and then I'll dig in a little bit with some questions I have.
Yes. Okay. And there is a quick overview for you, just if you need to review it in the beginning of the introduction, like page 10 or something like that. One page where they're all 5. You probably saw it, but okay. So most people, when they hear empathy, think of empathy as something that is automatically good. You're sharing emotions with others, and that will lead you to better understand them, to be united with them, and to help them.
Yes.
So the first thing is that most people nowadays, researchers would distinguish 3 aspects here at least, to say there's an understanding aspect, we understand others. There's a second aspect of sharing emotions, and the third one of helping others. Mm-hmm. But these 3 they are really independent from, or mostly independent from each other, even though they can overlap. So the first thing is we have to be careful what exactly we mean here. So most of what I talk about is more this middle notion of sharing emotions. I would actually say co-experiencing the situations of others, relating to others. And in many cases, that is a good thing. It gets you to help other people and also to understand them and all of that, to feel this sense of we. But I now focus on the negative aspects. So I'll go through them. First one, there's an assumption that people have that empathy leads to a resolution of conflicts. When we empathize with others, we are more likely to get there. I think actually in terms of conflicts, empathy plays more often than not a polarizing role, that we empathize with one side of a conflict and not the other one. When there's an adversary or a conflict situation, we tend to take a side, then we see the situation through the perspective of that side, then the other side becomes the bad other, and then suddenly this conflict that may be not about good and evil becomes suddenly one of good and evil. So conflict gets deepened by empathy more often than not. There may be ways of peacemaking and resolution with empathy, but I think the more normal case is that empathy can make people more deeply siding with one side and not the other side, to demonize them. Because of course they're the bad others. From that perspective, the others are always the evil guys. It's very hard to jump around with perspectives. So the first thing is polarization. Second side, and I'll go through them in a different order than the book right now, is what I call vampiristic empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, that one was
parents of us. Yeah, and this is that's interesting. I mean, empathy allows you to experience what others experience. You can share things that an experience that you would never have, which is amazing. I mean, we read fiction and we are in a different world. We make experiences that we want to make. That's great. However, it can also go to the step that people want to manipulate others to have experiences so that they could share them.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, that can happen with helicopter parents and others too, stage parents and others.
And the coach dads, the sports dads,
The sports dad who wants to see the son or the daughter be successful, basking in glory on the field. The kids that go through school, everything works beautifully. They get good grades and have good friends and all of these kind of things, have this, whatever all of these things are. And I think that's often the case, that the parents really want to relive their own youth in a better way. Protect them from failure, protect them from things that happen to them, or from disengagement, and so on. And so it becomes a self-purpose for the empathizer, not in the interest of the kids any longer. Or even worse, the parents believe it's in the interest of the kids, but of course, thereby they rob them of their independence.
Yeah, I'm doing it for their own good, and I know what's best for them, but it's benefiting the parents. And I had a bit of that phase where it was like, my kids are going to have the experiences I didn't have that I wanted. And I shortly recognized that within a few years. That was me, like, pushing my 2 eldest into sports, because I wanted to do sports, but my parents couldn't afford sports. And so it was me projecting. And so I forced them into it. And after 2 years, I kind of stepped back and I was like, this is what I wanted, not what you wanted. And they both were like, well, yeah, Mom, that's what we were trying to tell you. And so it was kind of like, okay, that wasn't the good way to do it. You think you're doing it for their best interest because if you're athletic, it leads to this or it does this and it gets you in this access. But yeah, it's more for ourselves. We're projecting that. And that's, I think the readers who come across that who are parents will kind of be hit with a sudden, oh, wait, that might be me kind of moment.
Of course, why did I write this? Because I'm a parent too. So exactly. Yeah. And I also notice it's very hard to draw the line because, of course, as parent, you also are the guardian of the best interest of your kids. So, so in that sense, there is something about this that is not incorrect. I mean, you do want to give your kids opportunities.
Yes.
So it's probably a moment of where do you draw the line where the kids are on their own. And,
Yes, yes. And now sadistic empathy.
So those were two. Sadistic empathy. This is sadistic empathy has, just to start out with that, has a whole range of things. There's the extreme things that we may associate with serial killers and Hollywood movies of horrific things. But there's also, as I want to emphasize, like an everyday side of little kind of power abuses. The basic structure of sadistic empathy is one of manipulations. People put other people in a bad situation. That doesn't have to be torturing. It can also just be something limiting their space of action, teasing them, embarrassing people in public. Because in that moment, when people are in a bad position, others can understand them. It's easier to empathize in a certain way if someone else is feeling bad. Bad in a controlled way that the sadist or the manipulator knows how their situation, because the sadist or manipulator may have brought about that situation.
Yeah.
So they understand how they feel bad, and therefore they can empathize.
Yes.
So it's a connection of bringing out negative situations in order to empathize. That is what I call sadistic empathy. And yes, that can involve radical acts of meanness, but it can also be these kind of more socially accepted forms of small abuses of power. The teacher who calls kids to the front of the blackboard in the old days to make fun of them that they can't do it or so, or to expose their inability or their weakness. It can be the bureaucrat who kind of hides behind a paragraph to kind of put up pressure on people. Little everyday behavior that is bullying, that's sometimes accepted, sometimes not.
Guilt tripping. I think wives and moms are familiar with that technique. The guilt tripping, we can kind of create a parameter of forced, like, feel bad for me and then do it for me. My teens always accuse me of being the queen at guilt tripping. And and I went, oh, maybe we all are a little sadistic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's things that I think, at first glance, luckily very few of us are going to the extreme ends of these things, but there's a lot of little daily behavior in that. That's interesting. And that I think plays a role here.
Yes.
And so what, just to come back to the overall structure of this, so one aspect of this sadistic empathy then is that the people who do this may actually want empathy. Even the sadist, the torturer may want a moment of empathy in it, but it's not an empathy to help others, but it's just to, oh, I know how you're feeling. I share your feelings. So it's empathy, what I call empathy for empathy's sake. So empathy is the goal here. It's not a means to help people, to relate to them or something like that in a better way or to improve their situation.
Yeah, and that's just quite a popular phenomenon that most of us aren't even aware that we're practicing, and somewhat. And I think back, and in my own life, I look back, and that's what I do when I'm reading books too, is you give me an example and I'm like, who is that in my life? Is that me? Is it this person? Is it this person? And one thing that really kind of struck me personally was your intro into the sadistic empathy with the example of gift giving and how it borders that line quite closely, a little too comfortably. And I had to laugh because in my own life, we have had an extreme chaos regarding gift giving. Whereas we as parents said we don't want gifts, it was becoming this uneven, unequal distribution that was getting too recognized by the children. And we have a blended family of all sorts. And so at one point it just came to be about, please acknowledge what's going on here. We don't want it to continue. Stop. To this person saying, I'm going to do what I want, and what is wrong with you? Gift giving is a good thing. And that expectation of, see what I've done for you. I gave you a gift, and it's expected that you're appreciating it and you're recognizing me doing this for you as a demonstration that I'm a good person. And when I started reading that and continuing onward, I just thought, wow, it's just these little subtle everyday occurrences that are socially acceptable, that if you push back against that conformity, it's quickly turned and manipulated. And it was, very eye-opening at how something as beautiful as empathy can be perverted that distinctly. Yeah.
Or it takes off on its own. I mean, it's not always completely perverted too. I mean, it's also, okay, you give the gift in order to kind of know how the other person's feeling. You want to celebrate having brought about their happiness and share into that. It's not all bad either. I mean, we should be careful now to say, oh, we should punish all of these things. And that is not a solution here. But it's more acknowledging that empathy is embedded in it or involved in a lot of practices that are dubious. But it makes us human. I mean, we do want empathy.
Yeah, in principle, it's not either, I think you said, pernicious or moral, but it's just, and I view that with a lot of behaviors and a lot of just everything. Nothing is necessarily good or evil on its own, but we have that potentiality to push it to the extreme on the spectrum and make it something that it was never intended to be.
Yes, exactly. And then, of course, the additional side to that is, if something involves empathy, we can't automatically say, oh, it's good because there's empathy. So that's kind of one of the arguments I would like to push here.
Yeah, and that's where, and what stuck out to me is, what I think a lot of us here, especially in the United States, are kind of centered on understanding what Trump voters are thinking.
Yes.
And that section that you covered regarding Donald Trump and the way that people were empathizing and how he was able to manipulate empathy so well. And then thereafter I read that and I'm watching him speak and I'm watching him interact and I'm sitting here going, wow, when you take empathy to that extreme where you have that us versus them sides, we have to take these sides and pit sides against each other, the side taking aspect of it. And then you go and you look at the divide within our country, politically especially. It was so eye-opening. I think that's what everybody's asking. That's what everybody's writing to. And lo and behold, you provide so much information that says, here's what happened. And so I'm wondering if you can just kind of go over that, what you noticed with Trump and supporters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Trump does, the strategy that he uses is that he radically polarizes. He always pits himself against whoever is around him, basically. That started in the primaries. I mean, where it was kind of him against all the other candidates for the Republican nomination for president. He was very good in kind of capturing these kind of moments. And then, of course, he stylized himself as the candidate already. He is the one person who can stop the flood of immigrants coming from Mexico and other places. He is the one who can protect us from the swamp in Washington, all the bureaucrats that he kind of cast as the enemy. Or he is the one against radical feminism and kind of zealousy of kind of political correctness that have gone overboard. He's the one who can stop that and protect that. So it's always this polarizing on the spot, often in a very dramatic faction. It's right now here, you're either on the side of Trump or on the other side. And the trick with that is, of course, if you polarize in a radical way and dramatize it, that in this moment something has to happen here, then people do choose a side. They are for Trump or against him or on the other side.
Yeah.
Thereby, he managed to get a lot of people, of course, to choose his side because he's the one individual. By casting himself as the one against the many, the one is always more attractive. This is the old Hollywood scheme, basically. The one good guy against all the villains or so.
Yeah.
So even if he's the one villain, and often he's the villain too, and he knows that too, the one villain against the majority, still there's a attraction that has to be the one against the many. So he's a master of that in every moment, of course. That's the political movement things that we see right now in international politics, where he constantly kind of confronts different presidents in different countries. And it's always, here are two sides. This is the conflict. Something has to happen right now. He wants to see events right away. And that draws people in. I mean, that's attractive. I mean, it worked on me. I'm definitely not, I mean, I'm not a voter in this country.
Yeah.
I talk about my political affiliations and stuff like that. But I would say, no, I mean, just could observe that. I found that, wow. I mean, yes, I mean, it works on me, even if I do have a different political conviction, but I can see the success on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, when you had made that admission that you had started to understand in that empathy area, I started thinking, you know, there have been times where, given the direction and the narrative of the media, it created for me a feeling of the same, of going, I kind of feel bad for him. And
Yeah,
they
yes.
are kind of obsessed with him. And then you get stuck in that. And I don't vote. So I gave up that privilege, but I can see it, and I can see how, yeah, it's created such a pitting against people. We're constantly, and it's funny in my circles too, because we're of the Christian persuasion, and so we're against this us versus them mentality.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're able to say, I can compartmentalize that from my political beliefs. And then I think, well, okay, we're going to sidestep that idea. And then it becomes so divisive that it overlaps their theological beliefs and understandings, and they don't even recognize, but they're saying they're doing it out of empathy as well. And so we're using that empathy again and manipulating it more so, would you say, because we more want to empathize with ourselves than we do other people?
Interesting. I mean, first of all, I agree to everything that you said there. I mean, this polarizing and also the pitying aspect. I mean, there was something that you could even pity Trump at times. This fight against the media and so on and so. Even when, of course, he was wrong, but still, by casting himself as the one there who would be the target of everything, there can be pity. And then one can be impressed also about how fast he is, that he doesn't give up or something like that. So that's all definitely true. So yes, now what you just mentioned here, I think is a key aspect about empathy. Again, this is the general understanding of empathy that I want to question. The general understanding of empathy is that empathy is good for the one we have empathy with. That's kind of the key notion. Why is empathy so good? Because it helps others. Mm-hmm. I think actually I'm much more skeptical and say, first of all, empathy is good for the empathizer, for us. So that can often mean that we also empathize more with the in-group, but we can also empathize with people who are different from us. I mean, empathy is, and that's fascinating about it, is a bridge to people from other cultures and people with differences to us. So there's a reason why we can have hope on empathy. But in the outcome, I would say, well, in doubt, empathy is probably, first of all, good for us as empathizers. We connect with them, we get something out of it, we have the benefit of feeling empathy for empathy's sake, or we have this vicarious, vampiristic empathy, we experience things we wouldn't experience. But that's good for the others is not so clear. And in some cases, it's bad for them. In some cases, we manipulate them into situations that they wouldn't want to be in. Yeah. So that's the first thing about that. Yes, the second aspect to that is that, yes, we do have a tendency to empathize with people who are more like us. So it's not really the radically other. So there is a more in-group bias, people we're familiar with, and all of these kind of things. That's true. But there I would still say, well, empathy can also go to the other group. So it's an interesting thing that both can happen.
Yeah. And is I noticed that that kind of is foreshadowed in when you talk about missionaries and the way
Mhm.
that the empathy is projected, but it also can become that self-indulgent, I'm doing this for me. And especially
Mhm.
within the deconstructing circles of Christianity, breaking away from evangelical ideas, you see that pushback and understanding against the missionaries, where we start to see, oh, this has been more about the self and not so much as actually
Mhm.
doing good for others. And so that's where that empathy gets pushed to that extreme, and it becomes more about the empathizer and look at
Mhm.
how great I am and what I'm
Yes.
doing in
Yes.
this, especially in this socially status climate that we live in, too. We get to show others how empathetic I am. And
Yes.
it's more so for
Mhm.
ourselves and our ego.
Yes. So that's what I call the false side of empathy, exactly what you describe. I call it false empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, exactly. I mean, kind of clapping yourself on the shoulder for doing good work. And I think, unfortunately, that's the case with a lot of cases of helping empathy, and missionary work, um, where people kind of are seeing a scene where someone is in need, whether that's people in a country that has a famine or a natural disaster, or whether that's people in our own backyard, basically where there's help needed, where a lot of people kind of see that scene and see, okay, empathy is needed here. But what they do is they kind of identify more with the helper figure. They
Mm-hmm.
cast themselves as the helper, or there's a real helper they can identify and empathize with. And then yes, they do imagine that this helper will help the people in need, but they really see themselves more in the glorious role, the hero, the helper here who can get the praise for doing good work. And it's a dubious thing because it does lead people to do good things. So I don't want to downplay this. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
want to say, oh, this is horrible. They should immediately ban this. No, I mean, people are doing good work, and it's hard. You need a motivation to do something like this, to be a missionary, to be an humanitarian aid worker.
Yeah.
That's all not so that's good, but it does have a potential then to backfire. I mean, that people, if they don't get the praise for what they're doing, don't get the recognition,
Mm-hmm.
they can develop resentments. They can become very cynical. And they can let it out on the very people they're supposed to help. Then, in some cases,
Yeah.
so one of the cases that I observe is, of course, the German refugee crisis, where the German government did something fantastic. I still think it's fantastic. The German border is still open for political asylum seekers.
Mm-hmm.
Germany has taken in, I mean, I don't know what the precise number is right now, 1.7 million people or something like that since 2015. That's amazing. I mean,
Yes.
that's amazing. And Germany is a rich country like the United States, so I think it's the right thing to do. But it has backfired. There was huge enthusiasm, but the political costs were huge. Um, and a lot of people now basically they hope for big results right away and a glorious celebration that will be ongoing, but they downplayed the problems and they didn't truly empathize with these people and their complex fates coming into the country.
Yeah. And that's that other danger of that false empathy, that it runs out and
Yes,
it runs out.
it
Like
runs out more easily.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we all gain a momentum and esteem. And if we want to do something like with Hurricane Katrina and whenever there's a humanitarian crisis, we all want to hurry up and gain steam and do our best. But then eventually it just kind
Mm-hmm.
of starts
It,
to fizzle out. And
yes,
then you're left with the unintended consequences of not enduring the empathy.
yes,
And
exactly.
now, from going from limited empathy, there's a part in your book where you talk about the danger and the extended empathy and what that can do to an individual.
The extended empathy, just to be sure, the extended, do you mean the self-loss argument or the
No,
now the evidence comes.
it was towards the end, with the dangerous line of, I took a note. I'm so unprepared. Here.
No, you're well unprepared. It's just, I probably don't know my book as well as I should.
That's okay. You know, I often worry about that as well. I think I'm going to write this book that I'm working on, and then I'm going to go, did I write that? Did I say that?
Yes, exactly, exactly.
I think it was. No, I can't find my note. I'll have to email you about that later.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
But,
Exactly. I mean, whatever you write up, I'm very happy to read it, and then we can go over it and we can fix some formulations.
Yeah. Maybe I'll need some more breakdown and get you on another call. Okay, well, how about let's jump to your ultimate question in the beginning was, should empathy be taught, and how, and for what reason?
Yes.
And what I thought was unexpected was, yes, absolutely, but not for moral improvement.
Yes.
So empathy and morality, they don't need to pair up with each other in order to do good? Or how would you?
Yes. I mean, so most people assume that empathy is so good because it is good for moral reasons.
Yes.
It can be, but it can also not be. And that's why I would say the safer reason, the way to promote empathy is not simply to assume that it will lead to cases of doing good things and so on. I have too many examples where basically that is not working, or where people redirect the empathy that should be for the morally right kind of place. So in that sense, I mean, the most empathetic person, I don't think, is the most moral or ethically right person. There's too many things going on there. So that's why I would say, no, the first thing is we have to understand, we have to disentangle them here. Why I still think that empathy is wonderful and is enormously good. I mean, it connects people with each other. The world would be very sad without empathy. I mean, friendships, love, all of those kind of things really require on deep connections with people. And that's great. And also empathy leads us to live what I often call is living a richer life, where you imagine other situations, where you participate in the life of another person, whether it's a real person, a close friend, or someone you just learn about from far away. You are able to participate in this, and that is fantastic. It makes us grow in many directions. So it absolutely should be taught. It should be promoted on many levels, but it needs to be held in check. Funny enough, from the moral side, we have to be careful not to abuse it morally, but we need to have it to grow. And I call this ultimately for aesthetical reasons. I mean, for complexity, a richer life. And that I believe in very, very firmly. And I also think schools should teach empathy indeed, or should do some aspects of teach that.
And yeah, and I like how you point out the three top improvements aesthetically would be that. Okay, let me back up. Widening the scope of that which we experience. For me, right away, when I read that, I thought of another speaker that I'm a fan of, Theodore Zeldin, who speaks of connection. And he speaks of that connection through conversation and how important it is for that conversation, but what that conversation requires to make that connection is this empathy. And what it provides for us, again, is widening the scope of our own experience. And for me, that's kind of my fundamental mantra. I'm never going to have just enough knowledge for myself. I need the experience of others. And that's where empathy has that positive bonus benefit for everybody, is it widens our scope, and then it provides us with more perspectives to consider other than our own. And that's where the positivity and the beauty in empathy can be demonstrated and seen. And so the book is not anti-empathy. It's be cautious about empathy.
Yes. I think that sums it up very well. Exactly.
Yes. All things are lawful. Not all things are beneficial.
Yeah.
Watch our extremes.
Yeah. Beautiful. Very, very, very good. And it also kind of basically says one thing for me, which is if you want to live a good life, or a morally good life, it's not easy to say that there's one thing you need to do and all is good. I mean, having a lot of empathy makes you good. No. I don't think there's one simple guide that gives us orientation. I mean, rather it's really a plurality of things. We have to kind of weigh what we do in each situation, whether it will promote good things or not, and whether we should embrace it. And so empathy is I mean, so basically I want to say, no, empathy is absolutely essential. It's one of the most important things we have, but it shouldn't be blindly embraced, and certainly not for simple moral reasons. It too often supports the wrong side.
Yes, I love that. That's a great way to wind this down. Fritz Breithaupt's book, The Dark Sides of Empathy, will be available on Amazon June 15th by Cornell University Press. So I encourage all of our listeners to pick up that copy. I know my co-host Michelle is very interested in also reading your book. She is very intrigued by empathy, and I believe is writing to it as well, working on her PhD. So another lovely scholarly addition for both of our bookshelves. And so again, I want to just thank you so much for doing this interview with me, and thank you so much for this contribution to the works of empathy, Professor
Thank you,
Fritz.
Danielle. This has been a fantastic pleasure. Great. Thank you. Thank you.
All
Thank you for
right.
having me.
Thank you so much.